I thought it was just another slow Saturday morning at the Clock Tower Cafe until I saw my bank account said $12.47. The sunlight crept in through the big front windows of the cafe, casting long golden bars across the floor like it always did around 8:30 a.m. I had my regular seat by the corner window, a worn booth with a cracked red cushion and a view of the post office across Maple Lane. Dot, the silver-haired waitress who'd been here since before the jukebox broke down in '98, brought me my usual iced black coffee, no syrup. "You're early today, hun," she said, setting it down with a soft clink. "Slow day at the market?" I smiled and nodded, pulling out my phone and my grocery list from my canvas tote. The plan was simple: sip slowly, mark off deals from Tomlinson's flyer, and budget my weekend with care. That's how I kept things going. One coupon, one tip shift, one quiet Saturday at a time. I swiped open my banking app, out of habit more than anything else. The balance took an extra second to load, like it was hesitating. Then it blinked onto the screen. $12.47. I froze. No decimals, no pending transfers, no explanation. Just $12.47. At first, I thought it was a glitch. I tapped refresh 3 times, each tap a little harder than the last. Still the same. I scrolled to the transaction history, my stomach tightening as lines of text popped up. Transfer to Diane Whittaker, $3,982.10. 3 days ago. My whole savings, gone. My hand went numb holding the phone. I looked around like someone else might have seen what I just had, but the cafe was just as peaceful as ever. The old men by the window were arguing over whether the Braves were cursed. Dot was humming along with Patsy Cline playing on the speaker overhead. I didn't even remember the moment I stood up and walked outside. I needed air. I needed answers. Standing under the cafe's red-striped awning, I tapped my mom's number. It rang twice. "Hey, sweetie," she answered, cheerful. "What's up?" "The money," I said. "You took it, all of it." "Why?" There was a pause, a light clatter in the background. Then her voice came back, calm, almost too calm. "Well, I needed it. It was an emergency." "What kind of emergency costs $4,000? I tried to keep my voice even, but my hands were already shaking. She sighed, like I was the unreasonable one. "It's complicated. I don't expect you to understand. Sometimes families need to step up." "You didn't ask," I said. "You didn't even tell me." "I didn't think I needed to," she said flatly. "After all, we're family." The call ended before I could say another word. I didn't even realize she'd hung up until the line went quiet in my ear. I stood there for what felt like a full minute, phone still against my cheek, listening to nothing. The door to the cafe opened behind me, and I heard Dot's voice float out. "You okay, hun?" I couldn't answer her. I slipped the phone into my pocket and walked down the sidewalk instead. My mind was buzzing louder than the cicadas. I thought about my rent, my dental bill, the emergency fund I'd scraped together one grocery shift at a time. I thought about how she hadn't called me in 2 months, but somehow still had access to my account. I thought about how fast she'd gone from "how are you" to "I need what's yours." By the time I circled back home, the sun had climbed higher, and the heat was thick enough to curl the edges of the flyers on my door. I didn't bother reading them. I went straight to my laptop and started taking screenshots of everything: the transaction, the timestamp, the account name. I made a folder labeled Evidence July and put everything inside. I didn't know what kind of emergency cost nearly $4,000, but I intended to find out. My mom said she needed the money for an emergency. Turns out the emergency involved white sand and margaritas. I found out the next day in the most casual way possible. I was making a peanut butter sandwich in my tiny kitchen when my phone buzzed with a new message from Aunt Marlene. She's not technically my aunt, more like my mom's childhood friend who never stopped sending me holiday cards, even after Mom stopped mentioning me at all. Her messages were usually recipes or blurry photos of church potlucks. But this one just said, "Look how happy your mom looks." I clicked it without thinking. The album took a moment to load, and when it did, the first photo hit me like a slap across the face. There she was, Diane Whittaker, my mother, standing on a beach in Key West, sunglasses perched on her head, holding a drink with a tiny umbrella. Her smile was wide, almost theatrical. Next to her was Ron, my stepfather, holding Kayla on his back like some Instagram dad. They all looked tan, relaxed, and utterly free of stress. I scrolled. Kayla at a seafood grill, captioned, "Family first." Ron holding a cocktail glass, clinking with Diane's, a video of them parasailing, laughter in the background, and one photo that made my chest tighten, Diane lying on a hammock, book in one hand, drink in the other with the caption, "Finally, the break we deserve." I sat down hard at my tiny kitchen table, the peanut butter sandwich forgotten. I stared at the screen like it might start making sense if I looked long enough, but it didn't, because there was no way to square the woman in those photos with the one who just told me she drained my account for an emergency. A break they deserved? What about me? What about the break I had never gotten? The anger didn't come all at once. It crept in slowly, like heat rising from the pavement. I clicked through the rest of the album, photos of sunsets, resort dinners, perfectly filtered shots of palm trees, and something inside me cracked just a little more with each one. There wasn't a single picture of me, not one mention. I might as well have been a ghost. I closed the album and opened a drawer under the table. Tucked between some old takeout menus and expired coupons was a small photo album I hadn't touched in years. I pulled it out and flipped it open. There it was, a picture from 2006. Me and Mom at Lake Lure, both wearing ridiculous floppy hats. I must have been 4 or 5. She had her arms wrapped around me so tightly, my face was almost squashed into her chest. We were both laughing. I remembered that day. She bought us matching strawberry ice cream cones and let me feed ducks with bits of bread from the diner. That was the woman I missed, the woman who used to braid my hair on school picture day, the woman who used to hum Patsy Cline while cleaning the windows. I didn't know when that woman disappeared, but the one who took her place wouldn't even ask before stealing from me. I set the album down gently. I didn't want to cry, but my eyes burned anyway. That night I stayed up late going through old emails and texts. I realized something I hadn't let myself admit before. Nearly every message from my mom in the last 3 years had been transactional. "Can you help with this? Do you have time to drop that off? Could you Venmo me for groceries? Never 'how are you?' Never 'I miss you.' And now a vacation on my dime." While I was working double shifts, counting quarters to buy off-brand cereal, she was clinking glasses in the Keys. I turned on my laptop and opened the folder I'd made, Evidence-July. I created a subfolder and named it Vacation Album. I dragged all the screenshots in, every image, every smiling face, every fruity drink. The hypocrisy all neatly saved. Part of me wanted to confront her right away, call her, demand she explain how she squared this with the word emergency. But I knew better. Diane didn't argue. She redirected, manipulated, and guilted. She didn't answer questions, she spun them. Instead, I texted Grandma Joanne. Just something simple. "Can I come by tomorrow?" Her reply came within minutes. "Always. You never have to ask, sweetheart." I leaned back in my chair and let out a long breath. My apartment was quiet except for the hum of the old fridge. Outside, the air still held the weight of summer, but I could almost smell the jasmine by Grandma's porch already. I whispered aloud just to the room, "Then why am I never part of that family?" I took screenshots of everything. If she wanted to talk about family, I had receipts. "You're overreacting," my mother said. "It's just money. We're family." The words echoed in my ear long after she said them, like some kind of tape loop stuck on repeat. I was sitting on the edge of the bench outside Tomlinson's Market, still in my khaki apron, the one with my name stitched crookedly on the front. My shift had ended half an hour ago, but I didn't have the energy to go home. The heat clung to everything, my skin, my breath, my thoughts. A little girl ran past with a popsicle dripping down her arm, her grandfather trailing behind, smiling as he warned her not to trip on the curb. Behind me, the old men were playing their usual game of checkers under the covered picnic shelter, smacking pieces down with exaggerated flair. It was a typical small-town Friday afternoon. Everything looked the same, but inside me, nothing felt the same. The confrontation had started with a phone call. It wasn't even my idea. Diane had called me first, like she was following up on a customer service issue. I saw the screenshots you sent Marlene, she began. That was unnecessary. It's not like we were hiding. You weren't hiding, I asked. You said emergency, Mom. That doesn't mean spa resorts and beach umbrellas. She sighed like I was being difficult. It's just money, Samantha. We're family. Sometimes we help each other out. No, I said, voice flat. You help yourselves. I just got the bill. That's not fair. You took it without asking. That's theft. And don't give me the family speech. You stopped treating me like family the minute you married Ron and decided I was optional. That's when she dropped it. You're overreacting. It's just money. We're family. Those words clanged in my ears louder than anything else she said after, and she said a lot. She said I was selfish, that Kayla had a bright future and didn't need all this drama, that Ron was deeply hurt. I'd suggest anything untoward. Maybe if I'd been more available, they wouldn't have had to do things this way. She made it sound like I forced them to steal from me. Eventually, I hung up. There was no point continuing a conversation where logic had been replaced by emotional acrobatics. I thought that would be it for the day. But 10 minutes later, as I sat under the slowly wilting shade of the market-striped awning, a new text came in. Kayla, why are you making this so dramatic? We're supposed to be sisters. I stared at the message for a long time. We were never sisters. We shared no history, no childhood, just a few years of forced holidays and uncomfortable dinners where she got the biggest slice of pie and I got asked if I was still into writing or whatever. Still, I didn't reply. I didn't have the strength to argue with a teenager who had no idea what it felt like to be erased. Instead, I stood up and started walking toward Willow Creek Park. It wasn't far. I needed somewhere quieter than the store, somewhere I wouldn't see Kayla's name lighting up my screen again. The park had always been a sort of sanctuary, gravel paths winding between old oak trees, benches warmed by the afternoon sun, and ducks waddling near the pond as if the world would never change. I sat on the bench closest to the chess tables. An elderly man across from me tipped his cap in greeting, then turned back to his game. He didn't ask questions. That's why I liked this place. I pulled my phone back out and opened my notes app. I started typing, not because I thought I'd send any of it, but because I needed to say it somewhere. You don't get to rewrite history, Mom. You don't get to pretend I was always part of your happy family unit. You made choices. You looked away at every school concert, every scraped knee, every time I asked if we could just have dinner without Ron turning everything into a performance. And now you're asking me to pretend like none of that mattered, like we're family, and this is just a small hiccup in a lifetime of closeness. We're not, it's not. I hit save, but I didn't close the app. I just sat there, letting the words hang in my lap like damp laundry on a clothesline. Truthful, heavy, still drying in the sun. My phone buzzed again. This time it was Ron. He didn't even bother with pleasantries, just launched into it. I'm disappointed, Samantha. Deeply disappointed. Your mother has done everything she could for you. Like stealing from me, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. She raised you, fed you, house. You don't pay back that kind of investment by acting like a stranger. I almost laughed. You mean the years she spent pretending I wasn't in the room? Or the holidays where I didn't even get a stocking while Kayla got monogrammed luggage? He scoffed. It's not about stuff, it's about respect, and clearly you've got none left. I hung up again, this time faster. I sat back against the bench and watched a woman walk her dog past me. She gave me a soft smile, like she could see I needed one. I nodded in return. I don't know how long I sat there, phone still in hand, letting the heat bake into my skin. The weight of years, of being invisible, of being expected to comply, settled in my chest like a stone. But somewhere beneath that heaviness, something shifted. I remembered Grandpa Henry's words, said half-jokingly one summer when I was 15. The people who say family is everything are often the ones who take the most. Maybe he wasn't joking. My phone lit up again, this time with a notification from Kayla. I didn't even open it. Instead, I opened my banking app. I hit the settings. I removed Diane Whitaker as an authorized user, a button I should have pressed years ago. I looked up at the blue sky, my hand steady for once. I'm not your emergency fund. I'm your daughter, and you lost that. As I sat back down on the bench, exhausted, my phone buzzed. A message from Mr. Alvarez? I don't mean to pry, Mr. Alvarez said softly, but I think I can help. I stared at the message for a long while. It had arrived just minutes after I sat down on the same park bench where everything seemed to unravel. I didn't even know Mr. Alvarez had my number. But then again, I didn't know much about Mr. Alvarez at all, just that he lived 2 doors down from my apartment, kept mostly to himself, and had a habit of pushing an old steel cart full of tools up and down the street in the early evenings. We'd only ever exchanged polite hellos. He had the kind of presence people overlooked, and yet somehow he had noticed me. When I got home that evening, his porch light was on. The neighborhood was beginning to quiet down, the buzz of lawnmowers giving way to the clink of dishes and murmurs behind screened doors. I passed by slowly, wondering if he meant for me to respond. I didn't have to wonder for long. As I reached my mailbox, I heard the soft creak of his gate and his voice behind me. Samantha, I turned. Hi, Mr. Alvarez. He raised a hand, not quite a wave. You got a moment? I hesitated, then nodded. Sure. He didn't ask me to come in. He simply walked around the side of the house to the backyard. I followed, uncertain. The space behind his house surprised me. Neat, peaceful, full of rose bushes in bloom and old bird feeders hanging from tree branches. A metal lawn chair waited beside a tiny iron table set with 2 glasses and a sweating bottle of iced tea. We sat in silence for a few seconds before he poured us each a glass. He didn't ask if I wanted any sugar. It tasted like mint and lemon. I don't know much, he said slowly, but I hear things. The walls in this building are thinner than the drywall should be. I managed a small smile. Guess I've never noticed. He sipped his tea. I've lived here a long time. People assume I don't listen because I don't talk much. But that's the thing about people. They say a lot when they think no one's listening. I watched a hummingbird dart near a feeder and hover like it was suspended on an invisible string. My daughter would have been your age, he said quietly. I looked over. He wasn't looking at me, just watching the hummingbird. She died 20 years ago. Car accident. Someone else ran a red light. Nothing dramatic, just gone. I'm I'm sorry. Thank you, he said, voice steady. I don't bring her up to make you uncomfortable. I only mention her because, well, when I see you, I think of her. Not because you look alike, but the way you carry things, quietly, carefully. I didn't know what to say. No one had ever described me that way before. I heard your phone calls, he said after a moment. Not the words, just the tone, the kind of tone that comes from someone being drained. I looked down at my glass, the condensation pooling at the base like a tiny moat. Can I ask you something, Mr. Alvarez? Sure. Why would you care? He didn't answer right away. Instead, he leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. Because I know what it's like to be treated like you don't matter, and I know the power of someone noticing. That quiet hung in the air for a few seconds, but it wasn't awkward. It felt rooted, like it belonged there. I'm not a lawyer, he continued, but I worked in legal services for 35 years, mostly civil stuff, wills, property, that kind of thing. I've still got some friends who do pro bono work, retired folks mostly. There's someone I think you should meet. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a worn leather wallet. From it, he drew a small business card, slightly bent at one corner. Ruby Hensley, he said. Retired, but not tired. She's sharper than anyone I ever worked with. Know the law. More importantly, I know people. Call her. Tell her Manny sent you. I took the card. It had a simple serif font, her name and number, and underneath in smaller letters, Private Legal Counsel, specialized in family civil matters. I don't know if this is a legal thing, I admitted. It just feels wrong. Wrong often looks different than illegal, he said, but wrong still deserves to be acknowledged. I nodded, folding the card carefully into my pocket. Thank you, I said. Don't thank me, he replied. Just pay it forward when someone else looks invisible. We sat a little longer, sipping iced tea. He told me about his garden, how the rose bushes were planted by his wife, who passed away just a few years after their daughter, how he kept them going, not because he was good at gardening, but because she was. Sometimes keeping something alive is the closest thing to holding on, he said. The sun had dipped low enough that the yard was bathed in golden light. The hummingbird had left, and the bird feeders swayed gently in the breeze. When I finally stood to leave, he walked me to the gate and gave a simple nod, the kind that said, "This is here if you need it again." Back in my apartment, I pinned the card to my fridge with a magnet shaped like a slice of cherry pie. Then I sat on the couch, feet tucked under me, and for the first time in days, I felt something close to still. He slips a small card into my hand. "Call Ruby. Tell her Manny sent you." I expected another guilt trip from my mother. I didn't expect a legal threat in my mailbox. The envelope was thick and formal looking, tucked between a pizza coupon and the weekly circular from Hyatt's General Store. My name was printed in full, Samantha Grace Whitaker, in a typeface that screamed official business. There was no return address, just a simple postmark from Raleigh. I carried it up the stairs like it might explode, set it on the counter, stared at it for 5 full minutes. Then I opened it. Inside was a printed letter on a letterhead I didn't recognize. The first line made my stomach drop. "To whom it may concern, this correspondence serves as a formal request for acknowledgement of familial obligations regarding educational support for Miss Kayla Hendricks." My eyes skimmed. Phrases like moral responsibility, support structure within blended family dynamics, and reasonable contribution expectation jumped out like red flags. The whole thing reeked of legalese stitched together with emotional manipulation. It wasn't even a real lawsuit, more like a warning shot dressed in a suit and tie. But still, the message was clear. They were trying to scare me, shame me, box me in with formal words and implied consequences. For a moment, I felt that old familiar freeze creep in, the one that came when I was younger, and Diane used to say things like, "After everything I've done for you," or "This is why we can't have nice things." But this time, the freeze didn't last. I walked to the fridge, pulled off the business card Mr. Alvarez had given me, and dialed the number. "Ruby Hensley," a voice answered. Strong, crisp, a hint of amusement around the edges. "Hi," I said, suddenly unsure. Uh, Manny Alvarez told me to call you." "Well," she said, "if Manny says I should take the call, I'm taking it." "What's going on, sweetheart?" I explained. Not just the letter, but the whole twisted history, the savings account, the beach vacation, the callous entitlement, the message from Kayla, all of it. She didn't interrupt once. When I finished, there was a pause. Then she gave a dry laugh. "People like that," Ruby said, "don't ask for help. They demand it, wrapped in legalese." I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. "So, this isn't real?" "Oh, it's real in the sense that it exists, but no court in North Carolina is going to enforce a moral responsibility to pay for your stepsister's dorm room. They're trying to bluff you into submission." Her tone was firm but not unkind. She reminded me of Dot from the diner. If Dot had gone to law school and kept a loaded briefcase under the counter. "Come see me," she said. "I've got office hours at Book and Brew. Tomorrow morning work?" "Book and Brew?" I asked. "It's a bookstore cafe. You'll love it. Smells like cinnamon and constitutionals." I laughed, the first real one in days. The next morning, I found her sitting in the back corner of the cafe, surrounded by law books and coffee cups. Ruby was in her 70s, tall and lean, with silver hair pulled into a twist and a brooch shaped like a gavel on her lapel. She greeted me with a handshake and an espresso. We sat in oversized chairs that made everyone feel like a child again. I showed her the letter. She skimmed it once, then again, then snorted. "This isn't law," she said. "This is theater." She pulled out a yellow legal pad and started jotting notes. "We'll write a response, nothing dramatic, just clear and firm. Think of it like setting a boundary with a velvet rope." She scribbled as she talked, murmuring to herself now and then. Every so often she'd glance up and ask, Did she ever formally apologize? Or has she paid back any of what she took? The answers were always no. After a while, she sat back and handed me a fresh printout. Here it is, a nice little letter that says no. That's it? Sometimes no is a complete sentence. I folded the letter slowly, like it might shatter if I rushed it. Can I ask, why do you do this? You're retired. You don't have to help. Ruby smiled. Manny helped my son get clean 25 years ago. We all pay it forward eventually. She poured more espresso into her tiny cup and raised it like a toast. To boundaries, she said. To boundaries, I echoed. As we wrapped up, she handed me an envelope sealed and ready to drop in the mail. Put this in and walk away. That's how you reclaim peace. That afternoon, I walked straight to the old blue mailbox outside the post office. It was chipped and faded, but it stood like a sentinel beside the sidewalk. I slid the letter in and let the flap close with a soft metallic clink. It didn't feel like revenge. It felt like air, like space. When I got home, I curled up on the couch, a blanket over my lap, even though it was warm out. I didn't need the weight for warmth. I needed it to remind me I was grounded, still here, still whole. My phone buzzed again. I almost didn't check. But curiosity got the better of me. Kayla, you're really tearing this family apart. You can't just walk away from your family, my mom yelled. I met her eyes and said, I already did. She was standing outside Hyatt's general store when I spotted her. I had just clocked out after my Sunday shift, a paper bag of dented corner canned goods in one hand, keys in the other. The rain had just started, a slow, lazy drizzle, but it didn't seem to bother her. She was still in her vacation clothes, as if the trip had never really ended. White capris, big sunglasses pushed up on her head, and that straw tote she used to call her errand bag. It hung awkwardly from her shoulder, full of something that made it bulge strangely, probably the papers she wanted me to read, or sign, or fold under. I stopped in my tracks, feeling that tightness again in my chest, like the world was trying to take my air before she could. I've been trying to call, she said, stepping forward. You blocked me. Why would you do that? I didn't answer, just stared, waited. I had to find out from Aunt Marlene that you're trying to humiliate us legally. That letter from your lawyer or whatever it was, that was uncalled for. It wasn't a lawyer, I said calmly. It was a boundary. Diane narrowed her eyes, like she was trying to figure out if I'd grown an extra limb. You're being so disrespectful. There it was, the buzzword of the week. Respect, I repeated. You mean like when you drained my savings without telling me? Or when you told Kayla I was selfish for not wanting to pay her dorm costs? That's not what happened. It's exactly what happened, I said, louder now. You didn't ask, you took. You used me. Then you tried to shame me for not wanting to be used again. The few people walking by slowed. One woman pretended to check her phone while eyeing us from the corner of her eye. A man pushing a cart full of melons into the store kept his head down, but his ears open. Kayla deserves a good future, Diane snapped. And I didn't, I shot back. When I was applying to colleges and you didn't even read my essays. When I asked if you could co-sign a student loan and you said, Ron and I are trying to remodel the kitchen. When you skipped my graduation brunch to take Kayla to a makeup lesson. She opened her mouth, but I didn't stop. You made your choice, Mom, years ago, and now I've made mine. Ron appeared then, coming from the passenger side of their minivan parked along the curb. He didn't say anything, just stood there with his arms crossed like some disapproving wall fixture. You owe this family, she hissed. We've done everything for you. You gave me nothing I didn't pay for in guilt, I said. And I'm done paying. For a moment, something flickered in her face. It wasn't remorse or even surprise. It was fear, the kind of fear people get when they realize the grip they thought they had is gone. I didn't raise you to be so cold. You didn't raise me at all, I said. I raised myself while you were busy playing house with your new family. Her mouth tightened. I've tried, she said, stepping closer. I've tried to include you. No, you tried to keep me on standby, just close enough to call when you needed something. I'm not on call anymore. That did it. The last pretense dropped from her face. The patient mother mask slipped, revealing the same frustration I'd seen on her face when I was 15 and dared to say I didn't want to go to Kayla's birthday party because I had a school play, that look that said, "How dare you make me look bad?" She glanced around, maybe realizing people were watching, maybe finally seeing how small she looked at this moment. Then she stepped back, shoulders stiff. "You'll regret this," she said. "I already did," I replied, "but not anymore." I turned and walked away, the bag of canned goods pressing against my hip with every step. The drizzle had picked up into a soft, steady rain, soaking my hair and shirt, but I didn't care. It felt good, like rinsing off years of buildup. The Depot Cafe came into view just up the street, its yellow neon open sign flickering slightly in the window. I pushed open the door, the bell overhead chiming with its familiar metallic note. Inside, the air was warm and smelled of brewed coffee and cinnamon muffins. There, by the far wall, in their usual seats, were Mr. Alvarez and Ruby. Manny raised his cup slightly in greeting. Ruby nodded toward the empty chair beside her. I walked over, slipped off my damp jacket, and sat down. No one said anything at first. There was no need. Ruby slid a mug toward me, already half full of coffee, cream already added. I took it, wrapped my hands around the warmth, and exhaled. I sat down, took a sip, and smiled. For once, silence didn't mean loneliness. It meant peace. There's a quiet kind of strength in walking away from a place that no longer sees your worth. What I learned, sitting across from neighbors who became more family than blood, is that kindness often comes from the least expected corners, and that's where it means the most. Just like a porch light on a foggy night, compassion has a way of finding you when you've nearly forgotten what it looks like. So if someone ever makes you feel small, remember, the measure of your value isn't in what they take, but in what you choose to give. And who chooses to see you without asking for anything in return